Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Sound. My name is David Sagura. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Glassbox Media and host for this podcast. Our goal is to provide you with an inside look into the world of podcasting with actionable tips and strategies that hopefully make you more successful at everything you're doing as a podcaster. Join us every Thursday as we bring you expert insights and exclusive interviews with amazing people in this industry. Anything ranging from the podcaster hosts themselves, to podcast executives, to people who are dabbling in the space, either as investors or would-be executives. In today's episode, we're honored to have Shannah Game as our guest today, the host of the highly acclaimed Everyone's Talking Money podcast, which was recently named a top 4 money podcast by the New York Times. With over a decade of experience as a certified financial planner, Shannah has helped countless individuals and families achieve their financial goals and live their best lives. So without further ado, let's dive right into the conversation.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. It's always fun to talk about something a little bit differently than what I'm used to talking about on my show. So it'll be super fun to kind of dive into the world of podcasting.
Amazing. To just kind of jump right into it, I just want to start at the top. And I'm sure it's what everyone out there that's listening is asking themselves. Why did you start this podcast? Like, what about it was inspiring to you, and what made you stick with it?
Well, I'm kind of one of those weird people that's like, I call myself like split down the middle. So I'm like half expert, half creative force. And so those two things are kind of always in conflict with each other or trying to work together, however you look at it. And I had been in the finance world for quite some time, but my background is entrepreneurship. So, I love to create things. And I started... when I became a certified financial planner, working with people and realizing that no one knew anything about money, like practically speaking. And I got my MBA and realized all my associates knew nothing about personal finance at all. I mean, we learned the business side of money, but nothing about how you actually do this in your personal life.
Sure.
And I started teaching at a university in Los Angeles in about 2012. They wanted me to create a financial literacy course and just said, create whatever you wanted to create. And so I was like, okay, well, let me create whatever I would have wanted when I was 18 years old. So we didn't use a textbook. We just used podcasts and blogs and articles and all sorts of things to really learn concepts. Well, it was in early 2015, January 2015, one of my students said, hey, you need to start a podcast. And that was, before podcasts were really kind of crazy like they are now. And so I'm like, okay, well, how do I do this? So I went home on a Friday and just researched like, okay, get this mic. This is how you record in GarageBand. This is how you edit a few things. And by Tuesday, we had our first episode up. So, it started off without a strategy, really, which is probably not my best advice for somebody getting into podcasting. But, I had no idea, like, what I was going to use it for, or would anybody actually listen. And, it's to be here, 8.5 years later and, to have the success that we've had, it's kind of crazy to think that it started all just from, a couple of days and an idea.
That's remarkable. Wow. And I was going to say, like you just said, it's been about 8 years.
Yeah, since 2015. So a little over 8 years.
No, that's amazing. I mean, it really is. I'm just like kind of taken aback because, I mean, when I think about even us here at Glassbox, to put it into context, obviously we're learning. We're still kind of like not quite making it up as we go, but we're always humble, always understand we have to do more. But our company started in 2021, and so I imagine that so many of our creators are actually been doing it that much longer. It's a humbling moment. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's just been wild to see the changes in the podcasting world. And I mean, it's also really exciting to see how, sort of mainstream has caught on to podcasting, and it sort of feels like the modern day, version of listening to radio, and that so many people love, podcasting, and also that you get to connect with a host. I think that's, what's really interesting is, you get to have sort of an inside peek into their world and how they see things, and, the guests that they curate if you have that type of show. So I just think it's really exciting, and to think that we're on just sort of the forefront of podcasting, that it's going to continue to grow and grow is, I think, really exciting.
That is exciting. When you think of podcasting then, like let's say specific to your show, what's been the biggest challenge that you faced both as the host and the producer of the show?
Well, I talk about a very sticky subject, money, which is a very, taboo. It's like keep the elephant in the corner subject. So
Right.
to get people listening and to get people feeling entertained on a show that's talking about money is incredibly challenging. Sometimes I'm like, God, why couldn't it be like a comedian or, something like a little bit more mildly entertaining? So to get people in, to get people, listening and repeat listeners, and to be able to have built up the traction that we did or that we have is, it's been incredibly difficult to do. So I would say, my subject matter is something that is challenging to get people to kind of buy in, to see that there is a fun way that maybe we can talk about these subjects. I think another like tough thing is just the shift in the podcasting market where, there was a huge celebrity infusion somewhere around 2018-ish, something like 2018, 2019. And so that really made it more difficult for like independent podcasters like myself, because you're competing against that market for everything, whether it's news coverage or it's ad spots or it's just downloads. And, so that's difficult. So it feels like, everyone and their brother these days has a podcast. And so you're trying to reinvent your show and you're trying to come up with new ways to get people to listen and to get advertisers interested in you. And, so there's a lot more to it these days than just, I'm just going to put out an episode and like cross my fingers and see what happens.
I can imagine.
From a producer standpoint, I think it's just, for us, because our subject matter is one of those that's a little tricky, we're always trying to find guests that have a story, that have kind of a unique angle, something interesting to talk about. And so, I think we're 970 episodes in or something like that. So, trying to keep it fresh, trying to get different guests and different opinions and different ways of talking about the subject matter that we do, that can be somewhat of a challenge as well.
I can imagine too. I mean, like there's folks that within your network, there's referrals, but you have to vet them, because when you're talking about like money and more importantly, people's personal finances, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but even for me, I think you hit the nail on the head. I feel like I was taught a lot about investment, different, business lines, as an entrepreneur to further my career. But no one actually told me what you do when you actually like get money. And like as an entrepreneur, it happened for me, like, I guess like later in life maybe, or at least like, I don't know, 7 years or 8 years into my career. And then suddenly I had to learn on the fly, a lot of referrals, a lot of mistakes, frankly. So when I think about a show like yours, I mean, it's just one of those shows that I think that can be so instructive and so helpful. But how do you let people know that, like, respectfully, they don't know what they're talking about? They don't know what they don't know. And I don't know. My mind is blown. I know I'm rambling at this point, but how do you actually, like, have this conversation? You alluded to it earlier, but people usually don't want to talk about this. It makes them insecure. How do you just throw it out there for the audience and try to get them more comfortable talking about maybe their biggest vulnerability?
Well, one of the things that I just do naturally that I didn't really realize was a strength that I think, other podcast hosts should do this in their own way is I talk about my mistakes. I talk about the things that I've done wrong. I talk about, different stories, different people that I've seen, because I was a working certified financial planner. So I, sat across from people and were knee deep in their money situation, their money mistakes. And so I like to break down a lot of the walls I think that exist around money. There's somehow this societal norm, I think, that that says that we're all supposed to be perfect. We're all supposed to make these like perfect money decisions, and we don't talk about money with other people. And I mean, there's just we could go on for hours and hours talking about this, but I think just being relatable, just being able to expose yourself in a way to the audience that feels like they can connect to you, that makes you feel like you're a real person and not some just talking robot that's up here, dishing out money advice. And that was certainly something. I mean, I have some pretty strong opinions when it comes to the money space. There are a lot of podcasters in this space that are not credentialed, that, they speak from a place of personal experience, which there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I feel like when we're talking about money, there needs to be some sort of like foundational base that you know what you're talking, from. And when I interview the guests, obviously they're the expert and I'm helping them shine, but I also need to be able to play two roles. I need to be able to play the role of the listener and ask the questions that I think a listener would want to ask, but then I also need to play the role of an expert and ask the questions that I know, the listeners need to know. So it's this really interesting combination, I think, but really just being able to be relatable and having people feel like you're a human on the other end, I think just goes a huge way.
Couldn't agree with you more. And, to your point, I mean, people can add a lot of value, obviously, if they speak from experience. Maybe they've had lived experience as well. But what role do you think your training, basically, as a certified financial planner has, kind of enabled you to do that, respectfully, maybe other podcasters can't do?
Well, in order to become a certified financial planner, you have to literally learn everything about money. It's like getting a black belt in money. I used to have this picture when I went through my training to become a CFP, and there was a stack of books, if I stacked them all up, that came to my waist. And I'm about like 5'6", so that kind of gives you a rough idea. And you had to know literally every single detail in every single book to pass this just massive 2-day exam. So, I know it gives me shivers now still thinking about it.
2 days of testing. Wow. I don't like the sound of that.
Lots of trauma. Yes.
Yeah.
But, it's not only like learning the education, it's also, working with people on a one-to-one basis and being responsible for helping them make money decisions and helping them achieve their money goals. And also something that I talk about a lot on the show, which is really sort of my backbone, which is the behavioral side of money. So your relationship with money and where you come from and how all that gunk kind of gets in the way. And so I feel like if, you don't have the expertise and you don't have the experience and the responsibility of actually helping real life people, there's a missing element there between the advice you're giving. It's not to say that it's not good. To me, it just feels like, you've not actually done the thing that you're talking about.
I think it's fair. You want to understand that someone's got not just a training, but is put in the time, like, for lack of a better term, the sacrifice needed. So I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing I was also curious to know as well, in listening to your past episodes, like you mentioned before, you have a lot of awesome guests. I know they all kind of contributed in their own way, but I was curious to know from you, what ultimately you thought was maybe the most memorable guest, or guest, if that's too much pressure, because I know singling one person out, probably too much.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a huge question. I don't know if there is necessarily anyone in particular. I think what's so cool about my show is, you would tend to think that we just talk about money advice, straight money tips. But to me, money touches all aspects of our lives. So we need to go to all of those different places. So, whether it's mental health and we're talking about, stress and money, or we're talking to a sleep expert. We had a great sleep expert on, and she was talking about the connection between money stress and sleep, and how, if you don't get enough sleep, you can't function well. If you can't function well, you can't make good, solid decisions in your life and create action. I mean, it's just this whole sort of loop pattern that we go on. So, that's not maybe a subject that you would normally connect with money, but it has a very direct connection. So we've talked to all sorts of experts like that. We've had entrepreneurs on the show. We've had, musicians who talk about their story of coming up and, how they had to be crafty with money to try and get to the place that they're at. We've had, of course, a million authors on the show that are sharing their story. We just did an episode that's going to release in June for Gay Pride Month, that I'm really excited about, where we talked to Carl Nassib, who is the first gay NFL athlete out. And he was talking about how much he's so passionate about financial literacy, and he's doing a whole lot of initiatives, has a couple companies around it, and how he loves to like get in with fellow NFL players and like teach them about compounding interest and how they can stack their money up. But he also was talking about this idea of authenticity with your money, and how so many of us just kind of blindly spend and save our money, but we don't really connect it to who we are and to our vision and to our values, and how for him being the first kind of outwardly gay NFL player, pro NFL player, to him it was so important to be really authentic in not only what he does, but how he spends his money and how he gives back. And so, those sort of stories I think are always really great to like couple alongside of the real sort of, traditional money how-tos, if you will.
It's great. I'm going to basically do a power skim later and try to like zero in on some of these episodes, because that just sounds really cool. On that note too, this is another question that might put you on the spot, but as you know, and for our listeners out there that are kind of tuning into this episode, we recently entered into a partnership together, Glassbox Media and, your show. So I guess, what are you expecting from this? Like, how do you think that might elevate everything you've already accomplished?
What I'm really excited about, and something we've been working on the last couple of years, which I think Glassbox plays a direct role in, is creating a whole brand around the show. So, the show's good. The show could always be better. You could argue everything could be better. But the show's good. We really believe in our content. We believe in our guests. I really believe in my messaging. But we want to build it out. We want it to be more than just a podcast show. So I think the exciting thing about Glassbox is having all of your expertise and knowledge and your team's expertise and knowledge to kind of come in and say like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and let's figure out some interesting things we could do. Let's figure out some interesting, revenue opportunities. Let's figure out how we could maybe get, some more PR, some more, mentions out there about the show, how we can get some more interest. So, I kind of see the partnership with Glassbox like, helping me climb the ladder, and, that we're able to do it together and figure out some really kind of unique ways of doing it. And, I think one of the things I love about working with you is because, you are an entrepreneur, you are, a risk taker, and you from what I know about you, you can kind of see between the lines, which is how I think about things as well. And so I think, it's really interesting to have all of these minds come together and say, okay, let's just see, what we can do and what we can figure out.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for those compliments, but I can definitely tell you that the whole Glassbox team is excited to hit the ground running with you. We have a lot of ideas, obviously not just on the brand partnership side, but to your point, all about how to grow your audience, leverage PR, different types of tactics that we think are very scalable. So sky's the limit. Couldn't be more excited.
I love to hear that. Yes, I'm a sky's the limit person too. So it's, when you're an independent, podcaster, it's really myself and my husband who run the show. He produces all the episodes. And so, we have an editor, of course, but it's a very small team. So to be able to feel like you're partnering up with people who have sort of a shared vision, and of course, we all have a shared goal. It's at the end of the day, we want to help people, but there's also a money-making component of that.
Sure.
But to feel like, you kind of step in and you get to pick up some extra team members is, really exciting.
I'd agree. On that note too, before we wrap up, I want to kind of open it up just to you, just in case we haven't covered something that you think is important or you want to say to that extended listening audience out there.
Wow. I mean, I think we've hit the main things. I would just say, one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is to really figure out, especially if you do a show like my show or any show that is kind of an advice show, like figure out what your distinct message is and kind of what your I guess, thematic platform is, and do that, go in that direction, and don't be swayed by reviews. I haven't read reviews in, I don't know,
Oh, wow.
3, 4, 5 years. Just bad for my mental health. So, because everyone's going to have an opinion. Everyone's going to think, something's great and something's terrible. So, it's just easier for me not to do that. But, figure out what you want your show to be about and go in that direction, and don't get worried about what other people are doing, because they're going to do their thing. And if your show has a message, if your show has a theme, if you are a compelling host, your show is still going to find an audience. So I think that's probably like the last thing I would just say to anybody listening who is out there either running a podcast or thinking about starting their podcast.
Couldn't agree more. And that's literally what I wanted to ask. Like, if you had any advice for people that are aspiring or active hosts. And like, I think you hit the nail on the head. It takes a lot of trust, not just from partners, but in yourself too. So well said.
Thank you. I think the last thing I'll just say is, people are also really nervous about the ad side, particularly if they haven't added in, ad revenue to their show. They're worried that it's going to upset the listeners. And I tell people, if you're doing an advice type show, especially like I'm doing, you're basically giving out free advice. 900 episodes, that's probably, I don't even know how many thousands of hours of free advice. So, that's work. That's your job, and you should be able to get paid, for that. If I'm watching a YouTube video, I'm going to have ads. If I'm watching TV, I'm going to have ads. I mean, it's just part of the business of doing what we do. So, I wouldn't be afraid to dabble in that. I just also make sure that those advertisers really align with your vision and values and with your show. And, any listener would hopefully realize that, you're picking ad sponsors that you feel really good about. And so, hopefully that resonates with the listeners.
Yeah, I'd agree. Not to drone on or steal any thunder, but we sometimes get that too. And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it's almost like this guilt thing, or dare I say, like a lot of artists selling out. But the truth is, it's media. Media is valuable. There's different ways to monetize it, clearly, but I think brand support has always been kind of the bread and butter for a lot of types of media. And I think it's not a coincidence, at least for us, that FAST channels, free ad-supported channels, AVOD, basically advertiser-supported subscription services, are really having their moment now and taking off. So you're preaching to the choir, and hopefully it influences and makes a lot of podcasters out there that are kind of at that tipping point feel a little bit better about leading into something that is logical, and I think at the end of the day, inevitable. So thank you for saying that. Makes our lives easier too, just side note.
Yeah, I mean, it's, like you said, there are lots of different ways that you can slice the, business revenue portion. But I think that for a lot of shows where it makes sense, you're leaving something on the table if you don't at least consider that option.
Amazing. And I guess on that note, I'm going to play us out. So thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode of The Business of Sound. As always, this show is produced by Erica Miranda and Nick Kastner. New episodes are, of course, available every Thursday. And if you're listening to the show, we would ask you to please consider giving us a 5-star review. It helps with discoverability and a little bit of extra motivation as well. For anyone that got something out of this, please feel free to join us and follow us essentially on Glassbox Media, specifically on Instagram and LinkedIn. And of course, thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next week.